Moving on to number 10, business items, Bridge Street widening consultant presentation. Hello.
Thank you. Actually, if I could just take a moment before I get into that, I would like to introduce Sierra Wakefield, who is our new city clerk administrator as of next Monday.
Good job, Sarah.
She didn't know I was going to do that. She's like, oh my goodness.
I'll be happy she has a mask on.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to transition to Bridge Street widening, and we're specifically talking about the section between Gray Avenue and Cooper Avenue. And so I just want to preface this that when we originally started the design for this section of Gray Avenue, we were really viewing Bridge Street as being a parallel route to Highway 20. So being the engineers that we are, we look at how do we cram as much traffic in through this section as we possibly can, and we designed a section to accommodate that. It's through working with SACOG and particularly civilist consultant, which Michelle's going to be giving us a presentation tonight, that we had to take a step back and evaluate, is this really the best route for this segment of roadway? You have commercial corridor to the west, you have a commercial corridor to the east, and then you have this residential neighborhood in the middle. And the city has been successful in purchasing the properties on the north side of Bridge Street through this section. And so there's opportunities in the future in terms of what to do with those properties. And so Michelle Reeves has a presentation for us tonight, a little bit different than what we've done in the past, is that she's going to be presenting via Teams. And so she's going to show up on the screen over where the city attorney shows up. And with that, I would like to introduce Michelle Reeves with Civilist Consultants. And then once Michelle's done with her presentation, we'll bring it back to me for a few additional comments. So Michelle, welcome.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, it's working. So I'm going to launch straight into screen share, and as I understand it, you won't be able to see me once I go into screen share. So let's try that. Okay, so can everybody see the presentation, the first slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, and then the next test is, does this slide move?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yay. Sometimes it doesn't, and then we have to start again. So just wanted to express a little bit of gratitude both to SACOG, who kind of put the original team together that worked on this, and then also the local government commission that is going to be working with you guys on an ongoing basis to kind of look at raising funds for road improvement in phase 3. And then, of course, everyone at the city who worked with us on this. It was actually a really fun project. So I'm going to dive in because, as usual, I'm going to cover tons of information in a tiny amount of time and attempt not to sound too much like a drug commercial at the end where they list all of those terrible side effects at light speed. But it's going to be a little bit like that. So we're going to start with how I break corridors down. So the first thing that I want to do is share with you kind of my thought process as I start development work on corridors or start trying to improve economic performance on corridors. And the first thing I want to understand is just what are their authentic identities? And I break down identity into 3 different sections. And the first type of identity is what I call contextual identity. I kind of want to understand the context overall of the road. So for corridors, I have 3 big buckets of roads. And the first one is a rural road, which is kind of like a small town state highway. Might have a crazy mix of uses, kind of a 2-lane road, commonly what you see on your way into small towns. I would say phase 3, feels a little bit like a rural road. The second kind of corridor is a mid-century corridor. And this is a road with smaller lot commercial, usually surrounded by residential. The small lot commercial has a lot of mid-century commercial structures on it. A lot of times these roads are 3 to 4 lanes. And then the last kind of road is sort of a wide load road. And this thing is just huge. It's really wide. It does not mix or connect with any of the surrounding uses, breaks up traffic patterns, and is not connected to any sort of grid. And there are pieces or elements of kind of wide load road in your corridor as well. So Bridge Street has elements of all 3. And again, I think the part that goes through the residential district, its dominant identity right now, I would say, in driving through that section is kind of more like a rural road. So after I've figured out what the context of a road is, then next I want to understand what I call the identity of its section or its sectional identity. And the thing is that long roads do not have a singular identity typically. They have different sections of identities. And the best way to describe this is kind of just like, how do you feel when you're on the road? So I kind of looked at the identities from the highway over to the river, and they kind of go national strip, mid-century corridor, residential, rural, industrial, commercial, and then industrial. That's kind of how I would break down your sectional identities. And you'll see how we tap into that, because we got to work backwards from authentically what is working in a section right now. I do want to just have a little detour, is that this little star is the gateway to your downtown. And it's in between the rural, industrial, commercial, and industrial land, which is a pretty tough gateway for downtown. So a lot of people drive on Bridge Street, and this little intersection is doing nothing to remind me that I want to go hang out in downtown, because you have a really awesome downtown. And just another second side note, I actually show the pictures of your really fantastic angled parking and the trees that you guys did. That whole treatment there on the main street is fantastic. And I show that around the country as a great example. So once I have an idea of these identities, I like to then start thinking about what's going on with site identity. So I want to know how individual sites, properties, and buildings, what are they doing to give me a great experience as a consumer? Is there anything that's particularly catching my attention or making me engaged or excited about a specific place? And I'm going to be really honest, there's just not a lot about Bridge Street that's very memorable. I want to give you examples of how you can do that on a corridor. So one is local. This is from Auburn Boulevard in Citrus Heights. I don't know if anybody of you recognize this building, but it was a long vacant restaurant. A lot of people think it might have been a church just from the shape of the building. But here's the before and here's the after, when it got renovated back into a restaurant with some wraparound outdoor seating, festive umbrellas, really bright color. I would remember this building even having seen it once. That's what I'm talking about with site identity. Here's another example. This is a building that was originally built as a bank in the mid-century. It turned into a used car dealership, but it had been vacant for well over a decade. It is on the edge of Portland on a busy corridor. So this is the before, and this is the during, and this is the after. And it turned into the Portland Mercado project, which I'm going to discuss a little bit more later. So these are examples of really amping up site identity and doing something that catches everyone's attention. And you can pretty much do this with any kind of building. And you can think about how you're improving economic performance in a district sometimes by just looking at how site identity is doing. So these are how I break down corridor identities. And when we went into kind of our big brainstorming planning session, this is some of what I wanted everyone to keep in mind before we dove into how we might tackle the residential section of the road. So I wanted to share that with you as well before I dive into how does the road impact commerce? How does the road impact what can be successful on its edges? Because that's something that you have to think about too if you want the things that you develop and if you want road improvement projects to be successful. So very roughly, you need to recognize that wide roads or places with fast traffic, there are certain things that can be successful and certain things that can't be successful on these roads. So these are the kinds of businesses that tend to thrive on these sorts of roads. Generally, I would say that small to mid-sized retail does not do well on these roads, and it doesn't do well on these roads for these reasons. You can't see them, they disappear, and you have no sense of what kind of experience or what they would offer, and so you just don't interact with them. So it's very tough for small to mid-sized retail. And people don't like living on these roads. So wide roads and fast-moving traffic roads are never places people want to live. Therefore, developers never want to build residential along these roads. The second kind of road, broadly characterized, would be a narrower road or a road with slower traffic. So in this kind of road, you can kind of put together a typical collection of brick and mortar businesses of various sizes, and they can generally be successful. Residential, the bottom one, likes to be on these kinds of roads. Industrial, though, does not generally tend to like to be on these roads. So it's really important when you're looking at how to tackle commercial land on either side or any kind of land development on either side of a road. It's just working backwards from the realities of what can be successful on those roads. So since you're widening the road, we're going to have to think a little bit from this toolkit of wide road, fast traffic as we're looking at developments. I want you to keep that in the back of your head. And then we're going to kind of dive into some of the brainstorming that we did back in July. And we kind of used Zoom to within an inch of its life and did a lot of virtual tabletop drawing, which was really fun and actually super effective. And we were really working backwards from these three goals. Like, we don't want to lose that really sleepy residential feel on the road. And could we make the road widening a project that would actually make the community better? And trying to specifically think about what we might be able to do with some of the city-owned properties. So I want to give you a quick summary of some of the things that we came up with, and I'm going to break them into two buckets, design and development. So let's start with design. And I wanted to say, before you dive into anything about design, the fundamental motivating factor needs to be that Bridge Street is a neighborhood. There are two parks, a nearby high school, and houses on both sides of the street. So everyone who goes through here needs to remember that this is a place to be, not a place to pass through. And a car needs to at all times feel like, kind of like, excuse me, I'm coming through. I know maybe I don't belong here. That's how you need to think about it in terms of design. So let's talk about what that means in a practical way. And the first thing that I want to mention is the wall. Walls are terrible, and they have no place in our communities, and they tell a story of separation. And what a wall is basically saying, and everything that you see in yellow on this drawing is where you're going to have a noise wall. What a wall basically says is that this thing we're building so doesn't belong here. We need to build a wall to block it off. So that's a very powerful story that we're really going to have to mitigate. And so that means that in these lots here where you guys still own property, we really need to develop that property. So we're just blocking the wall. And people won't even notice it's there. But these walls that are over here, where the walls are going to be visible, you're going to have to really think about how you are using landscaping and lighting and decoration and other kinds of things to soften these walls and maybe create a gateway to Lloyd Park on either side on those walls, so that you're really mitigating that idea that it's a wall, because they're really damaging to communities and they're very hard to make successful places where you have big giant walls. Second thing I want to talk about is lighting. So the secret sauce of mood, whether I'm trying to make a district better, whether I'm trying to make a store perform better, is 100% lighting. And if you know anything about making movies, the way that they make you feel in a movie is tied to both music and lighting. So if they want you to feel blue in a scene, they literally put a blue filter on everything. So lighting is the secret sauce of mood, and I want to talk about a couple of different things with lighting. So the first thing is fixtures. So these fixtures that you have in the more industrial section, these are kind of like freeway fixtures. These are really big, wide load road kind of fixtures that do not say cute residential neighborhood, place that you might want to be or you might want to walk. So you're going to have to really think about how you're fixturing. The second thing is the color of your light. So I want to go back through. If you look at this picture on the left, this is Dyersville, Iowa. I was just working there. It was actually my last trip before COVID hit in late February. It did start snowing, in case you were wondering. I always seem to travel to the Midwest for work in winter. And they're the home of Field of Dreams, the movie. And they have a super quaint and charming downtown. And what's fascinating is they have beautiful light fixtures, but the bulbs that they put in there are this terrible blue-green light. And so A, it looks like a runway if you look at that photo on the left, and B, there's no warmth to it, and C, it actually makes it hard to see the buildings next to it. So the degree, like the brightness of the light and the color of the light really changes the mood on that. So basically, the picture on the right, that warm kind of fuzzy light, that's below 3,000 Kelvin. So a lot of times I have public works people that just run out and pick a light bulb because they're just looking at power and they're not thinking about color. So color is really, really important in this district. And then the last thing that every public works person should be thinking about with lighting is that LEDs are programmable, and they can actually be different colors and different brightness levels, so you can adjust them, because sometimes a public sector light that we put in a residential neighborhood might be literally shining in somebody's bedroom, and being able to dial down that light a little bit, or being able to change the color to create a festive holiday environment, all of those things are valuable and should be thought about as you're buying fixtures. Next up in design is lane width. So if we have narrower lanes, speed is reduced, noise is reduced, safety is increased, and small business can be more successful on its edges. And so we talked about how we could reduce the lane width from the original plans, which were a freeway lane width, down to a lane width that still works for trucks, but is going to really slow everyone down. And then on-street parking. So originally the plan had on-street parking on the south, but not on the north side. But all the property you own is on the north side. And I think there's some real opportunity to redevelop those properties, but we're going to need some on-street parking because it's going to be pretty hard to redevelop those sites and have a lot of off-site parking or off-street parking for those. So we talked about reintroducing on-street parking on both sides of the street, which if you narrow the lanes, you have room for. And then lastly, this is a neighborhood and you've got, you know, sort of two things going on both edges. So as you're redesigning this, you might want to think about a gateway element on each side to just visually let people know you're kind of going through a different place than the industrial or the mid-century commercial that's on either side of it. So you can give people that visual cue as they're going in. So those are some of the, you know, sort of speed review of what we covered in terms of design. And now I want to talk just a little bit about development and what we talked about. And actually it was interesting that you guys were weighing in so much on economic development, because I think that you should be thinking of these parcels from the perspective of how you are using them to forward economic development goals in your community. How can you help build wealth for local people? How do you create entrepreneurship opportunity? How do you offer amenities for the neighborhood? Create a buffer between the houses and the road? And very importantly, how do we hide that wall? So those are all things that we can do. And I'm going to work west to east. And this was the map that was provided to me of the city-owned parcels, which are hash marked in green. And so I've put the wall back in there. And there's two city-owned parcels that are here behind the wall in the residential section. This might be a really interesting place to experiment with very traditional kind of 1900s small town density, like a cottage commons concept. Those are being introduced in small single lots around the country really successfully as sort of a gentle density. They're fantastic. So those two lots might be an interesting place to look at some new housing patterns or development. Next up, we've got the Lloyd Park. So I just want to say a 4-lane road with trucks and lots of traffic volumes. This is not a good edge to a park, because as a parent, you're always going to be worried potentially that your kid might kick their soccer ball out into that road. Just a really tough edge. And so I think that we can soften that edge by thinking of a use that has a commercial front, can be permeable so we can see over into the park, and also serve the people and interact with people who are engaged with park uses as well. So create kind of a soft edge and bring amenities to the district. And so I was thinking about a food cart pod, not a food truck pod. So there's semi-permanent installation. And so this is what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go back to that Portland Mercado example that I showed you earlier. So this was developed by Hacienda CDC, which does affordable housing for the Latino community in the greater Portland region. So this was the before of the building that I showed you, and this was the after. So I want you to see the really attractive large parking lot piece of land that was associated with that building. So my big joke on this building was that we could meet our landscaping requirement with all the weeds that were coming up through the pavement, because it was a pretty rough site. So what we did to bring active uses up to the street is we actually, the project purchased 8 food carts. They control how they look, they installed them, they created a cool outdoor covered seating area, and they rent those out as startup incubator restaurant space for Latino entrepreneurs. And it has become this huge destination across the city, and it offers this amazing mix of Latin food. It's really, really fantastic. And it is my teenagers' favorite place to go when they come home from college. So these are examples of the food cart installations there. So you could line those up on the edge of the park and rent them out. And then in this big sort of open seating area, you could also look at having some really large outdoor games, like a big Connect 4 or chess, or they make like concrete ping pong tables. There are all kinds of things that you could put out there that would be fun if you were eating, and they create a soft edge that also engages with the kinds of things that people might want to do in a park. So as we move further east and we look at the parcels that run just to the east of Lloyd Park, I went back to our wide road, fast traffic, what can be successful? And I picked up that idea of professional service. And I was really inspired. I work a lot in very small towns all around the country. And in every small town around the country, almost all of them are on a state highway. And in the run up to the town, there's always this collection of really small bungalows that line that rural road on the way into town. And almost every one of those bungalows has been taken over as a professional service office space in every town all around the country. And if they do it well, if you notice the one on the right, she did such a good job. It's probably the cutest retail store in all of downtown Prineville, Oregon, which is in Central Oregon. Giddy up. She did such a fantastic job with that. But those little houses really convert well to small professional service, and you have some of those converted to that already on the street and operating. So you could easily take each of these little half lots and do colorful little small professional service offices that are built to look like small houses, so that they fit into the neighborhood character, they block the wall, and you could offer them for rent or you could offer them for sale, and they would help to provide opportunity either for startup people who need office space or for people who are ready to purchase something and have the wherewithal, typically existing businesses. And then the last parcel over here, which is the furthest east and is adjacent to Moore Park. I went back to our list, and the fact that you have a lot of industrial on the street, and I was thinking about how do we tap into that a little bit but soften it. And so really looking at incubator maker space. So this is actually a picture from Twistworks, which took old sheds that were an abandoned ranger station right next to their downtown. And Twist has about 900 people in very north central Washington. They're very close to Canada. And they turn these into small incubator maker spaces for a whole mix of different kinds of uses, including a high school shop space. And they turn these into production and manufacturing spaces for small startup businesses in the community. And so going through and doing sort of a concrete or a metal building with high ceilings and exposed trusses and big glass roll-up doors that are roughly 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, those kinds of spaces are almost impossible to find. And they're really appealing to a very wide cross-section of uses, from maker, light industrial, office, internet wholesale, all of those kinds of things. So these can also be divided into commercial condos and sold separately as well. So the last thing that I wanted to say about these kinds of spaces is, from an economic development point of view, you can manage them, since they're on city-owned property, you could manage them a little bit like a port and rent them out on a reduced basis to incubate new businesses, or you could develop them as for sale product and use them for that sort of leg up wealth building opportunity. And I'm happy to kind of talk about how some of those kinds of things get structured in the Q&A if you'd like. So those were some thoughts on design and development that we came up in the brainstorm, and that I kind of wrote up in the report that they wanted me to come in and discuss with you and answer some questions about. So I just want to leave you with a final thought about this road improvement project, because I actually think it's pretty exciting. And I think that if you really think about design and traffic speed and commercial uses, you can make this project provide economic opportunity for Yuba City residents, create a unique and distinct brand for the neighborhood, offer new amenities that could be a draw to the district, create an environment that stresses safety and multimodality, and prevent the road widening from creating a pass-through place in its wake. So that is what I wanted to cover today, and I am going to go out of screen share.
Great, Michelle. Thank you very much. Some very interesting ideas. I think I like all of them. It's very, very neat and kind of exciting. Anybody, any comment from the council? Questions?
Through the mayor.
Sir.
Yeah, wonderful presentation. So the presentation you gave us, looking at all the small commercial spots or small houses and stuff like that, I didn't notice anything on parking. That's going to be a busy thoroughfare through there. And if it's a business, let's say a salon, you know you're going to have at least 5 to 6 cars there at one time, unless there's only 2 people in the building, or 2 stylists or whatever. But what are we going to do about parking? And that's going to be pretty speedy.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's actually something that there are kind of a couple different ways that you can tackle it. So in looking around the greater neighborhood, generally when you look at those, and the reason I kind of modeled it after those small houses on the way into town is most of those have no parking in your rural road into the small towns, and they still get leased out as professional service office. And what that means is that the environment helps to shape who's interested in those spaces. So generally, for a professional service office that doesn't have as much off-street parking, you're going to have uses that choose to come in who don't have a lot of intensity of activity of clients at the same time. So it may not be a salon that chooses to go into it. It may be like the contractor house that I showed It may be somebody who's using it more as an office, and then people will either be biking or walking, or they will park in the neighborhood. The thing that's interesting about having the residential neighborhood and all the side streets all around that district is that the on-street parking in neighborhoods during the day are pretty empty because people are at work. So it dovetails pretty well with, picking up some of the demand that exists from very small commercial space that is right on its edges. So my experience, because I do these kinds of projects all over the country, is you probably will find that the businesses, you're not adding so much inventory, that on-street spaces on either side of the street and then in the neighborhood should be able to absorb what is going to be in demand from those spaces. And the people who go into those spaces will typically, by definition, choose to go into them because it will work based on their parking requirements, which just means that it may preclude super parking intensive uses going into them. And that's fine, because that's just the nature of what you have there.
The earlier plans, dream plans for that corridor, they were going to put like an alley road in the back and put the houses closer to the street where people could park in the back. You didn't like that idea, our first plan or idea that we had?
So I think there's a lot to come out in the wash. I mean, I think there are a couple different ways that you can handle it. So if there's room and I don't have super detailed plans with dimensions and, where we can do curb cuts for the alley and backing in and out. So there's a lot to work through. But if you could do an alley load with one or two off-street spaces in the back, I think that would be valuable. I think it's just, I'd have to kind of play, and there's a lot of iterating to do. So I just would want to play around with, are we ending up with a size that makes sense? And are we ending up with, we really want the identity on the street to feel residential still, so that we have a buffer and an identity that still keeps it, kind of feeling like a neighborhood. So as long as it just doesn't get hyper dominated by a lot of parking, you'll still tend to find that in these kinds of uses, it's going to be like the hearing aid person that you have further up the street. Like those are the kinds of uses where you tend to have, not a lot of people backed up. You have serial appointments. They might need, they'll use that off-street parking that goes off the alley load for employees or for the owner, and it's usually driven by the owner. And then customers will still find spots to park on the street. And you're going to have a fair amount of spots on the street when you're done with the project.
And then last question, you were showing the small businesses model and stuff like that. The city's not really in the rental business. That's not really that's not really what we're supposed to be as a rental company. So if we do this, we're gonna have to tell the developer what he has to build on this project and saying this is the size you have to build, this is what we want if we do sell these properties. So is that in your plan or idea?
One of the things that you can do, so if you want to exit and you want to sell them, you can still develop them as the owner. And then you can think about how you're going to sell them and who you want to benefit from that sale. I mean, you have an opportunity when you own property to think about how you're driving that. And even if you're not interested in being a landlord, for instance, you also could think about, if you're interested in incubation space and providing affordable rental incubator space, are there nonprofit entities that would be interested in managing that for you? So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you manage yourself. So you could develop something on an incubator basis. So the Portland Mercado project that I showed you is not actually owned by Hacienda. They developed it, but the city went ahead and leased that property to them for $1 so that they could develop that project and make that project happen, which has been a great economic incubator for the Latino community in Portland. So there are different ways to structure things so that you could potentially still have those units be for rent. If you wanted to develop them for sale, then I would say that your options are I would most likely want to develop them as an entity, like as the city developing them, and then thinking about how you're selling those, whether you're dividing them into commercial condos or for fee simple sale, like the small houses, who's benefiting from that sale, and what are you trying to foster with the sale of those. So are you trying to foster specific kinds of businesses, or are you trying to do wealth building for communities who are often shut out from buying and owning commercial property? So there's a project I didn't show up on the screen that I worked on here in Portland that was in a traditional African-American neighborhood. And so they did a project called the Vanport Project, where they took an old car dealership, divided it up into commercial condo spaces, made it pretty cool. And then they sold them primarily to women-owned business, minority-owned businesses, and longtime residents in the community. So thinking about how you're developing and who you're selling to and who benefits, you want the development of these parcels to go to and benefit, Yuba City residents and people who've been there for a long time, and businesses and people who are really investing in your community, or you want it to benefit people who are typically shut out from these kinds of opportunities. So the example I just shared with you, the Vanport project, that was one where we brought together some different partners, and we sold those for about a 10% down payment and 0.3% interest for 10 years. And so the buyers were able to buy something for roughly the same monthly cost as leasing. And then we also use new market tax credits to help to fund the project, and those sunset after 10 years. So then the interest rate reset. So it was very successful at attracting sort of a really interesting range of businesses, partly because they got this opportunity to buy that made it accessible to people who had existing businesses and knowledge and expertise, but just couldn't get over the hump of a 25% down payment with a full build out at $100 a square foot.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah.
Through the mayor, this is Councilwoman Grace Espandola. I agree with you, Mayor. I really like the whole concept design. I'm on the other end of it, thinking that it would be a really good investment for us, in particular with the EDC conversation that we had prior to. I have heard about the pods in Oregon and how successful they are up in that area. The design is just, I think, would bring some life and character to part of our city that is desperately needing it. So I'm supportive of how your concept and the work that you put together. How can we finance it is the question that I think it's on our mind. But I really do like all of those neat, interesting ways. And driving through there, you really made me think about when I drive through that street, because I really don't feel like I'm in the neighborhood because my car is hitting the road so often, so hard with all the holes and everything else on that. So, right, Mayor? So I support the design. I really like it. Thank you.
Michelle, what quick question. I know that these are some recommendations, and they're very good ones at that, as I already said. Was there a maybe it wasn't considered, but if it was, is there a reason why maybe work-live spaces didn't make that cut?
Why I didn't
Work-live?
Oh, work-live. Live-work spaces are interesting. I've worked on a ton of live-work projects over the years. Live-work is super sexy. A lot of times, so there's an arc to live-work spaces. Probably the easiest way to describe this. So let's say if I'm working in a district that has commercial space, but that space is not doing well at all, and it's largely vacant. What's interesting is I can often take those kinds of commercial spaces in really troubled districts, and I can repurpose them into kind of open lofts. You might call them live work spaces, but they generally just become live spaces. Because really cool, funky artists generally can't afford, kind of a tricked out live workspace. So what ends up happening is they either become, so I'll give you an example. This was a district I worked in long before it redeveloped. So it was kind of a place where there were only industrial uses, no commercial activity on the ground floor, and a lot of drug dealing and prostitution and gun violence. And there are some spaces that a developer took on the ground floor and just kind of renovated into these kind of big open lofts. So for instance, there was an architect that took one who had a giant Lego collection, and he wanted a space where he could have, he had giant rolling bins of organized Legos everywhere. And so they often end up becoming just live spaces, kind of big, open, lofted live spaces first. And then as the district starts to change, then they become usually some form of an office wholesale kind of use. And then as the district continues to change, then those spaces will often become some sort of a use that has more of a retail or professional service like salon or spa. So there's kind of a life cycle to live workspaces. And I think that this magical artist who has a fair amount of money for a 1,500 square foot, cool, kind of lofted space, they've tended not to exist as much as we want. So they end up being just residential spaces or being converted into office spaces. They don't usually end up being live work because the price point is too high. The other challenge is that, so I guess I would back up. So when I'm developing a live workspace, what I want to do is develop something that will work in each of those three rough arcs, right? So I want a space that's flexible enough that it can be any one of those three things, depending on how the district is doing economically. The challenge is that we're building this on a 4-lane road that is projecting very high traffic volumes in the future. So that really makes the live part of it really not appealing because people just, even in cool, funky industrial space, they don't like being, essentially on a highway or a freeway. So that's not to say, I mean, you could look at, there are also, from a development consideration, there are fire life safety issues with fire separation and some of the other things to creating live workspace. So sometimes it's more expensive. You're either kind of like all in for that or you're not. So it's something that you could consider in one of these incarnations, but it makes all of the projects more expensive. And I still think it's probably not a super appealing environment to live. So that's kind of why I went the direction that I went.
Makes complete sense.
More than you ever wanted to know about live workspace.
No, you clearly have a lot of experience and you thoroughly answered my question, so I appreciate that. Anybody from the council, anything? How about from the public? Locally or, okay, Tom, and then anything on the computer? Nothing on the computer. All right, Tom, it's all yours.
Well, I want to say that I think that lady's pretty sharp, and
Yes.
I like it too. One thing to consider that Manny mentioned is alley. I would be concerned about that because that would be like a homeless hangout. You know what I mean? You might want to. You don't want this to be the newest homeless hangout in Yuba City. So. I just think that needs to be considered because we do have that huge problem. So, but I thought that was well done by that lady, and it looks great.
It's
And
Miss Shell's her name.
getting rid of the look of the wall too. Who wants to look at another wall? Thank you.
All right, so our action, thank you, Tom. Our action tonight, of course, accept the presentation, provide direction to Public Works staff should design modifications regarding lane widths, street parking, parkway strips, curb gutter, sidewalks be desired. Do we have any discussion on that? Yes, sir.
Through the mayor, the only direction that I would ask this Public Works to consider is based on my former job as a fire chief in the skirmishes with Plumas Street when they redeveloped it and its emergency access. When you start moving things around, just make sure that, and I know you will, just make sure that we don't end up with choke points, et cetera, where we can't get an ambulance or a fire engine, or even to Mr. Burns's comment in regards to a place for people to hang out in the back or something like that. Other than that, excellent presentation, neat ideas, and I think it makes a lot of sense for the city.
Yeah, so the direction that we're looking for tonight is really specific to the design of the roadway itself. And so if council's wanting to move this direction, what staff would propose is to go back and redesign the street section. So this upper section is the current plan, where you basically have 2 travel lanes each direction, the interior lane being 12 feet, the outer lane being 14 feet. We would actually change that so that you still have the median, 12-foot median. You would then have 11-foot travel lane, 11-foot travel lane, and then 13-foot parking and bike lane on the north side. So under this recommended change, we would be adding that dedicated parking on the north side. We would also have Class 2 bike lanes that would be added. One thing you would note, under the current plan, we have a 10-foot shared path. What we've received a lot of feedback on that is that a 10-foot shared path is not necessarily effective in terms of when you're commingling bicyclists and pedestrians. So under this revised plan, we would go back to a 6-foot sidewalk because we would have that that Class 2 bike lane on the section. So if council is favorable to going that direction, we will go back, redesign these plans to address, have this new cross-section, and then bring that project forward to move it forward. Now, that doesn't address the wall. The wall construction is part of the improvement plans. That's one thing that I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to, whether we address it through enhanced landscaping or you work with like the Yuba City Arts Commission to come up with some different ideas, to have artists put together ideas for ways to screen the wall or put art on the wall. There's a lot of things to consider in terms of how we can enhance this neighborhood. Once Michelle did that brainstorming session for us, it really opened our eyes in terms of the opportunities with this corridor. And so we wanted to take a step back and bring it before council so that you could get the same information we did and then provide us direction for it to move forward. And I also want to note Kevin Bradford, the Deputy Public Works Director Engineering, has been participating virtually this whole time. And so I know he's also online if you had any questions specific for him too.
Through the mayor.
Yes, sir.
So that's the same thing on the south side also, Diana, same plan, both?
Correct, correct.
Thank you.
So the 11-foot travel lanes are still very comfortable. You would move traffic. It would slow the speeds down when you were compared to 12-foot and 14-foot travel lanes on the north side, and then 12 and 12 on the south side. It does provide parking on both sides, and like I said, it also still has the enhanced features with the landscape median and then landscape planters on both sides.
I like it.
I do too. The bottom one.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the bottom one.
Per her, to the mayor, so per her suggestion, can we still go with the same lighting, or do we need to put street lighting instead of, she said like an industrial lighting? Do we still want to use that same plan?
We will evaluate that. The lighting on the section east of Cooper, if you've ever driven that at night, it's like as bright as day.
Mm-hmm.
And so with having houses on the south side, I think she brings up a very good point in terms of reevaluating the lighting there and making it more residential pedestrian scale. So it's not, as she noted, this highway lighting. Again, as engineers, we love it. We love having these big grand streets, and but setting that aside, we also appreciate taking a step back and reevaluating this and figuring out how can we really honor the neighborhood and still provide some great opportunities for not only the residents that live there, but then also opportunities for the properties that we own.
Diana, I don't know if we got to this point yet or not, but Michelle also mentioned some sort of, I don't know if it's a structure or something that would signify a gateway. I'm assuming probably at Gray and one at Cooper. Have we gotten to that far yet?
No, and again, I would separate that from the road improvement project, stub out conduit and things like that. So if you need to run electrical to it,
Okay.
you have the ability to, but then work that as a separate process, like I said, either through Arts Council or something like that. And then through that, what are the funding opportunities available to fund something like that?
Makes sense.
As you guys know, funding for this project is very limited. We've applied for grants in the past. We've applied for a grant currently. And, to be able to address this in phases so that we get the long-term plan, but we have to implement it in baby steps.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. I think you have what you needed.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you.